In this very first video for PHC 562, we're going to look at the anatomy and function of the central nervous system. First and foremost, these are the learning objectives. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to identify the major anatomical regions of the central nervous system, and you should be able to discuss the physiological roles and functions associated with each region of the CNS. Let us first look at the divisions of the nervous system. The nervous system is divided into two parts, which is the central nervous system that consists of the brain and the spinal cord, and this is where all information basically comes to and where all information or signals basically comes out from, and also where information can be stored. And then you have the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is as important as the CNS, and that's because the peripheral nervous system is actually what brings this information or signals to the central nervous system. The central nervous system and peripheral nervous system are composed of two main types of neural cells. First and foremost, of course, you have the neurons, which are basic nerve cells that function to transmit messages throughout the nervous system. And then you also have the glial cells, which provide structural and functional support to neurons. There are several types of glial cells. One of it is the microglia, which provide a phagocytic role in the sense that it destroys invading microorganisms, it removes cell debris, and promotes tissue repair. And then there's also the macroglia, which includes cells such as oligodendrocytes, Schwann cells, astrocytes, and ependymal cells, all of which have a variety of supportive functions within the nervous system. The neuron constitutes the functional unit of the nervous system. There are over 100 billion neurons in the brain, and each neuron has the ability to interact with and influence many other cells, which creates a system of intricate complexity. There are several different classes of neuron, but a simplified neuron is shown here on the screen, along with explanation of its various component parts. The nervous system is the main communication network in the body. It is guided by the central nervous system, or the CNS. The CNS is responsible for integrating sensory information and responding accordingly. It consists of two main components, the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is responsible for integrating most sensory information and coordinating body function, both consciously and unconsciously. Complex functions such as thinking and feeling, as well as regulation of homeostasis, are attributable to different parts of the brain. The spinal cord, on the other hand, serves as a conduit for signals between the brain and the rest of the body. It also controls simple musculoskeletal reflexes without input from the brain. The brain is divided into four anatomical regions: the diencephalon, the brainstem, the cerebrum, and the cerebellum, as shown on the screen. We are going to look at the various functions of each of these anatomical regions in the next few minutes. Let us take a closer look at the cerebrum. The cerebrum is made up of three main regions: the cerebral cortex, the underlying white matter, and several subcortical structures including the basal ganglia. The cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres that receive sensory information from and control the movement of the opposite side of the body. What I mean is the left hemisphere, for instance the one in purple, controls the right half of the body, and the right hemisphere in pink controls the left half of the body. These two hemispheres are separated by a deep groove called the longitudinal fissure. The brain has a unique appearance in the sense that the surface of the brain is highly convoluted with folds and grooves. And these convolutions are an evolutionary adaptation that allows a greater surface area to fit within the confined and limited space of the skull. The elevated convolutions are called gyri, and the grooves are called sulci, as shown on the screen. Human brains are wrinklier than the brains of any other animal, which is a key factor in our higher intelligence levels. The cerebrum has four major lobes. These lobes include the frontal lobes, the parietal lobes, the occipital lobes, and temporal lobes. Functions of the cerebral cortex include processing sensory information, controlling motor functions, and performing higher order functions such as reasoning and problem solving. So let us now take a look at each of these lobes more closely. Humans have big brains, and our frontal lobes, just behind the forehead, are particularly huge. The frontal lobes, the largest of the four, are in many ways the lobe which participates most in making us human. The frontal lobe is situated anterior to the central sulcus, and it is important for voluntary movement, expressive language, and for managing higher-level executive functions. So executive functions refer to a collection of cognitive skills including the capacity to plan, to organize, to initiate, self-monitor, and control one's responses in order to achieve a goal. For example, you rely on your frontal lobes when you do things like making plans, switching from one activity to another, or in resisting temptation. So the frontal lobes are considered our behavior and emotional control center and is the home to our personality. Posterior to the central sulcus is the parietal lobe. The parietal lobes are located near the back and top of the head, and this lobe is mainly concerned with sensory functions of the somatosensory category such as touch, stretch, movement, temperature, and pain. So they are important for processing and interpreting somatosensory input. For instance, they inform us about objects in our external environment through touch, such as physical contact with the skin, and about the position and the movement of our body parts, which is proprioception. So the parietal lobes are responsible for integrating sensory input and construction of a spatial coordinate system to represent the world around us. The temporal lobe is separated from the frontal and parietal lobes by the lateral sulcus. As with the frontal, occipital, and parietal lobes, there is one temporal lobe located in each brain hemisphere. It helps you understand language, retain visual memories, and both process and remember emotions. Damage to this region of the brain can have global consequences for virtually every bodily function, since much of what we do depends on emotions and sensory input. The temporal lobes interacts with and depends upon input from all other brain regions as well as sensory input about the surrounding world. The occipital lobe is located at the rear end of the cerebrum. This is the visual processing center of the brain. The occipital lobe is the seat of most of the brain's visual cortex, allowing you to see and process stimuli from the external world and to assign meaning to and remember visual perceptions. Located just under the parietal lobe and above the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe is the brain's smallest lobe, but its functions are indispensable. Another major region of the brain is the cerebellum. The cerebellum lies inferior to the cerebrum at the back of the head, and it is a vital component in the human brain as it plays a role in motor movement regulation and balance control. The cerebellum coordinates gait, maintains posture, and controls muscle tone and voluntary muscle activity. The brainstem is located at the base of the brain and it connects the spinal cord with the cerebrum. The brainstem provides innervation to the head and neck via cranial nerves, and it also contains nuclei associated with important body functions such as the regulation of blood pressure, respiration, swallowing, bladder control, and sleep cycle, among others. On top of the brainstem is the diencephalon. The main components of the diencephalon are the thalamus and hypothalamus. The thalamus serves as a gateway relaying sensory signals originated throughout the body to the cerebral cortex, and it is also involved in emotional and memory functions, whereas the hypothalamus is the major control center of the autonomic nervous system and plays essential role in homeostatic regulation. The hypothalamus links the nervous system to the endocrine system via the pituitary gland, and it also contains nuclei involved in regulation of body temperature, food and water intake, sleep and wake cycle, memory, and emotional behavior. If the brain is the command center for your body, then the spinal cord is the pathway for messages sent by the brain to the body and from the body to the brain. The spinal cord is actually a long bundle of nerves and cells that extends from the lower portion of the brain to the lower back. The spinal cord plays a vital role in various aspects of the body's functioning, including carrying signals from the brain, for instance, receiving signal from the brain that controls movement and autonomic function. It carries information to the brain, meaning transmitting messages to the brain from the body, such as sensations of touch, pressure, and pain, and it is also involved in reflex responses. So the spinal cord may also act independently of the brain in conducting motor reflexes, and one example is the patellar reflex or the knee jerk reflex, which causes a person's knee to involuntarily jerk when tapped in a certain spot. A very quick recap. In this video, you learn about the central nervous system or the CNS. Specifically, you learn that the CNS includes the brain and spinal cord. The brain is the control center of the nervous system and of the entire organism. The brain is divided into 4 major parts, each with different functions, and these parts are the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the diencephalon. The cerebrum is further divided into left and right hemispheres, and each hemisphere has 4 lobes: frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital, and each lobe is associated with specific senses or other functions. The spinal cord is a tubular bundle of nervous tissues that extends from the head down the middle of the back to the pelvis, and it functions mainly to connect the brain with the peripheral nervous system, as well as to control certain rapid responses called reflexes without input from the brain. If you like this video, hit like, click subscribe, and click on the bell so that you would be notified whenever a new video is released. Let us now move on to the next topic, which is the neurotransmitters of the central nervous system.